The studio was silent, too silent. Bright lights glared off polished glass desks as world leaders sat stiffly under international flags. It was supposed to be a respectful summit, one of unity, peace, and development. But then U.S. President Donald Trump leaned forward into his mic. With a smirk, he said slowly, "The U.S. will guide Africa's future. We know what's best." The words echoed like thunder. You could hear people exhale sharply. An African delegate coughed uncomfortably. A translator paused mid-sentence. Cameras zoomed in. Viewers around the world sat forward in their chairs. Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso sat motionless, hands clasped, his eyes locked on Trump. He didn't blink. Journalists whispered. Twitter lit up. "Africa is not yours" started trending in seconds. Trump smiled wider, thinking he'd impressed the room. But he didn't see what was coming. Traoré slowly stood, and the room held its breath. Traoré adjusted his microphone. The room went still. Even Trump's smile faded slightly. Traoré spoke softly, but it was the kind of soft that thundered. He said, "Africa is not your experiment. It is not your project. And it is not for sale." A wave of gasps rippled through the audience. A journalist dropped his pen. A translator stopped mid-translation and just stared. Trump blinked. Traoré stepped forward. "For too long, we have watched foreign powers write our story. But today, we write our own." His voice never rose, but every word felt like a drumbeat in the chest. He paused, then turned toward the cameras. "To every young African watching this, you are not weak. You are not behind. You are powerful, beautiful, and your future is not for someone else to decide." The audience stood in slow applause. A tear fell from the cheek of a South African journalist. Trump looked like someone had turned off his mic, even though it was still on. That clip would go viral in minutes. But in this moment, no one was thinking of the internet. They were watching history. As the applause slowly faded, Traoré reached into his jacket. People leaned in. Security stiffened. He calmly pulled out a folded letter, sealed with the flag of Burkina Faso. "This," he said, holding it high, "is a letter from the African youth. Not just from my country, but from Ghana, from Nigeria, from Mali, from Congo. They wrote this together." He unfolded it. The camera zoomed close. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from emotion. He began reading, "We, the youth of Africa, are not your charity case. We are not waiting to be rescued. We are rising, and we ask only this, that you step aside and let us grow. Let us build." He looked up. "We are not angry. We are awake." The room fell into stunned silence again. Trump's jaw tightened. But before he could interrupt, the moderator, a quiet elderly woman from Senegal, raised her hand. She looked at Traoré with tears in her eyes. "Captain, may we make your words official record?" He nodded once, and just like that, history changed. The camera operator had a decision to make. Trump was shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Some expected the camera to swing back to him, but it didn't. It stayed on Ibrahim Traoré. He stood tall, holding the letter of African youth. Not a wrinkle on his uniform, not a tremble in his voice. And yet, behind his calm tone was a storm. "We are not children," he continued. "We do not need a babysitter. What we need is for the West to stop stealing our breath and then asking why we gasp." The moderator tried to move on, but the audience didn't let her. People started clapping again. A few journalists stood. One cameraman whispered, "This is Mandela level." But Traoré wasn't done. "There are millions of African children watching this right now, in slums, in villages, in cities. They are being told their future belongs to someone else. I'm here to say no. It belongs to them." Trump tapped the table twice, annoyed. "You're being dramatic," he muttered into the mic. Traoré turned to him slowly and said just one word: "Enough." Somewhere in Lagos, Nigeria, a single mother named Chidinma sat on the edge of her worn-out couch. The summit was playing live on her old TV. Her 11-year-old son, Toby, sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes locked on the screen. When Traoré said, "Africa is not for sale," Chidinma's heart skipped. Toby turned to her. "Mama, he talks like he knows us." She blinked back tears. "Because he does," she whispered. Across Africa, in Dakar, in Kampala, in Johannesburg, families gathered. People were recording the broadcast on phones, streaming it on cracked screens. Even in rural villages, radios picked up pieces of the speech. It wasn't just what Traoré said. It was how he said it, like he'd lived it. Back in the summit room, an elderly diplomat from Kenya wiped her eyes. "We've waited decades for someone to speak like this," she whispered to her aide. And then, Traoré took something from his inner coat pocket. A photo. It showed a young girl carrying water on her head barefoot. He lifted it up. "This is why I speak. Her, and millions like her." And just like that, half the studio was in tears. Trump cleared his throat. The applause had gone on too long for his liking. He leaned toward the mic with that familiar smug grin. "That's cute, but you can't survive on speeches. You need us. You've always needed us. Without American investment, Africa stays in the dark." Some gasped. A journalist dropped his notepad. Traoré didn't flinch. He walked to the large screen behind the stage and tapped a button. A slideshow of mines, oil rigs, ports, and factories flashed, all owned by foreign companies. "You call that investment?" he asked quietly. Then he tapped again. A chart popped up. Billions flowing out of Africa each year. "You take $10 and leave us $1. Then you smile like saviors." Trump interrupted, voice louder now. "That's called business. It's not our fault if you don't negotiate." The moderator tried to intervene, but Traoré turned to the audience. "How do you negotiate when the pen was placed in your hand by the one who already wrote the contract?" Silence. Trump blinked. Then, oddly, he laughed, nervously. But he didn't know that clip had just hit the internet. And within minutes, it was everywhere. The screen behind Traoré suddenly changed. A short video began to play. It showed a dusty village in northern Burkina Faso, barefoot children running after a donkey cart, a school with no roof, and a girl no older than 8 collecting water from a dry well. Traoré faced the audience. "Her name is Aisha. She walks 11 kilometers each morning for water. She's never seen a laptop, but she can sing all of Thomas Sankara's speeches." The room was silent. "When I met her," he continued, "she asked me just one question. Why do they take everything from us and still call us poor?" Trump shifted in his seat. Traoré raised his voice slightly, not in anger but in pain. "Africa is not a desert of weakness. It is a field of flowers you trample for profit. But the world will remember what bloomed before you came." Back in the control room, producers debated whether to cut to commercial. They didn't. The world was watching. And now, Aisha's face was on screens in London, Lagos, Johannesburg, and New York. She wasn't a symbol. She was the reason. Behind the scenes, Trump's advisors were scrambling. His chief strategist whispered, "We're losing the room. He's not just talking, he's connecting." Trump didn't respond. He kept staring at the screen, watching as African youth waved flags outside the summit building. Across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, the hashtag #Africa is not for sale had gone viral. But inside, Traoré stayed calm. He leaned into the mic. "To the leaders of the West," he said, "we're not angry, we're aware." He pointed gently to the press gallery. "This is not a war. This is a wake-up call. Africa has bled silently for too long. Today, our silence ends. Trump forced a laugh. You talk like a movie character, he scoffed. Traoré nodded once. Maybe, but the pain I speak of is real. Then, to the shock of many, he stepped aside and invited a young woman from Mali onto the stage. She walked slowly, holding a coffin-shaped box, draped in the Pan-African flag. The moderator asked, stunned, "What is this?" Her voice broke as she answered, "These are the dreams of our people that never got to live. We buried them silently for years." And then the room broke. Even the cameraman wiped his eyes. In the far corner of the summit hall sat a quiet man. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't even listed on the guest list. His name was Ousmane Diallo, a retired teacher from Guinea. When Traoré saw him, he paused. "May I ask for a moment?" he said into the mic. Cameras followed as he walked across the stage and shook Ousmane's hand. "This man taught me under a mango tree," Traoré said, voice cracking for the first time. "He gave me a notebook when I had nothing. He told me, 'You'll change something one day.'" The entire room stood still. Ousmane nodded gently. "And now you have." The moment pierced hearts across the continent. In Accra, a taxi driver cried in his rearview mirror. In Kinshasa, children huddled around a radio, listening. Traoré turned to the world again. "We all had an Ousmane, a person who planted in us, while the world tried to plunder us." He bowed, not to the cameras, but to his teacher. Even Trump, for once, said nothing. The coffin on the stage remained unopened, and everyone watching wondered what was inside. No one spoke as the young woman from Mali gently opened the coffin-shaped box on stage. What was inside was simple. Just three things: a child's drawing of a flooded schoolroom, a small wooden spoon, burnt at the tip, and a blood-stained scarf, no bigger than a napkin. People leaned in. The room had never felt so heavy. Traoré stepped forward. "This drawing," he said softly, "was made by a boy in Mozambique who drowned while trying to cross a river after his school collapsed." He held up the spoon. This spoon belonged to a girl in Chad who cooked over open fire every night, until smoke took her lungs. She died at 11. And then he lifted the scarf. This was worn by a mother in Sudan. She tried to stop soldiers from taking her land. They beat her. She tied this to her daughter's wrist before she died. The room was frozen. Tears ran freely. Then Traoré whispered, "You say Africa needs guidance? We needed space to breathe, and you buried us." Even Trump looked down, not out of shame, but because he knew he couldn't answer that. Back in Burkina Faso, the streets of Ouagadougou were buzzing. People gathered at cafes, phone repair stalls, even under mango trees, watching Traoré's speech unfold. Elderly men held radios to their chests. Teenagers streamed the summit on shared screens. A grandmother whispered, "He speaks for us all." In South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, and Senegal, cars pulled over, markets paused, even churches and mosques turned on projectors to show the replay. People cried openly, not just at the coffin, but because someone was finally saying what had burned silently in their hearts for generations. "We have begged politely," Traoré continued on screen, "but today we speak clearly. The chains were not only on our wrists, they were on our minds." Meanwhile, Trump leaned back, clearly uncomfortable. He adjusted his mic. But the moderator didn't call on him. She didn't need to. The world had already picked a voice to follow. Social media exploded. Africa is not for sale hit 400 million views in hours. Instagram was flooded with images of the scarf, the spoon, the drawing. TikTok users made animations. Kids in classrooms reenacted Traoré's lines with tears in their eyes. And through it all, Traoré remained still, not triumphant, just truthful. That evening, Traoré received a handwritten letter. It came from a tiny village in Burkina Faso, carried by a motorbike messenger who'd driven nearly 10 hours without stopping. The letter was wrapped in cloth, smudged with dirt, folded carefully. He opened it backstage after the summit. It read, "Captain, you spoke for my father. He died with dreams in his eyes. You spoke for my sister. She carried water until her back broke. And you spoke for me. I still have breath. I will carry this moment until I take my last one. Amadou, age 17. Traoré held the letter tightly, eyes burning. He looked at his advisor and said, "Find Amadou. Bring him to the capital. I want him to know he matters." Later that night, CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera aired the full speech. But in every village and every city, people weren't just watching, they were feeling. And across oceans in Europe and the US, something strange happened. Young black students posted, "This is the Africa I never got to see." I cried, and I don't even know why. Because some truths aren't political, they're personal. After the summit ended, Traoré returned to his hotel. He didn't speak to journalists. He didn't post online. He just sat, quiet. Then his phone rang. It was his mother, calling from the village. She rarely called. "My son," she said softly, "are you safe?" He smiled gently. "Yes, Mama. You made the world cry today." He paused. "Was that wrong?" "No," she said, choking back tears. "But you must understand. Your voice is no longer yours. It belongs to all of us now." At that moment, outside the hotel, a crowd had gathered. Young people, hundreds of them, were waving flags, chanting his name, holding signs that read, "You spoke for me. Africa is not weak. Captain, we're awake." Meanwhile, Trump's team was panicking. Leaks showed his donors furious. International analysts warned Traoré's speech might reshape the global order. One strategist even whispered, "We didn't just lose a PR battle, we lost Africa." But Traoré wasn't thinking about power. He was thinking of the little girl in the coffin box, and how many like her still had dreams inside them, waiting. The next morning, before the cameras returned, a quiet meeting was requested. A well-known U.S. senator asked to meet Captain Traoré, privately. It was held in a discreet room, away from the press. "You've rattled powerful people," the senator began. "There are whispers. They'll try to discredit you." Traoré didn't flinch. "Let them whisper. Africa has shouted louder." The senator slid over a folder. Inside were reports, real ones. Leaked documents showing how African minerals, gold, cobalt, oil, had been systematically extracted by powerful companies with the backing of Western governments. "I shouldn't be showing you this," he said, "but after your speech, I needed you to see it. You were right." Traoré stared at the pages. He already knew, but seeing it confirmed everything he stood for. "Why now?" Traoré asked. "Because my daughter watched your speech last night," the senator said quietly. "And she cried. She asked me, 'Daddy, did you help steal their future?'" The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't hopeless. Because this time, someone from the other side had finally listened. Traoré stood, shook the man's hand and said, "Then let your daughter see you help fix it." Back in Burkina Faso, something unbelievable was happening. A peaceful march had begun in Ouagadougou. What started with 50 university students became 50,000, then 500,000. Within 24 hours, 1 million people were in the streets, marching for dignity. They held signs with simple words. "We are not for sale. We are enough. Thank you, Captain." They weren't protesting with anger. They were rising with pride. From Nairobi to Accra, youth led candlelight vigils. Mothers prayed in mosques and churches. Children danced, wearing homemade shirts with Ibrahim's face on them. An 8-year-old girl held up a sign. "You gave me courage." Traoré, watching the footage, didn't smile for the cameras. He simply whispered, "This is not about me." And he meant it, because this was about every African who ever felt invisible, every child who drank from dirty water, every father who died building wealth for nations that never said thank you. Back in Washington, Trump remained silent, because his words had started the fire. But it was Traoré's heart that turned it into a movement. Days after the summit, the world was still buzzing, but something unexpected happened. A group of children in Kibera, a poor community in Nairobi, gathered under a tin-roof classroom. With broken chalk and torn paper, they recreated Traoré's speech. Word spread. Soon, other kids from Niger, Ghana, Ethiopia began doing the same. They wore second-hand shirts. Some held sticks as microphones. One girl used a plastic cup as a podium. A 9-year-old boy in Tanzania said on camera, "I don't want to be rescued. I want to be respected." The video went viral. In Paris, a journalist covering the story broke down live on air. "I never thought a barefoot child could teach the world so much," she whispered. Traoré watched in silence. He turned to his security aide and said, "I've seen weapons in many forms, but I've never seen a weapon stronger than truth spoken by a child." Across continents, leaders were being forced to respond. Some offered apologies. Others made vague promises. But one thing was clear now. This wasn't politics. This was awakening. One evening, Traoré received a letter delivered through diplomatic channels. It was from Baron Trump, Donald Trump's teenage son. It read, "Dear Captain Traoré, I watched the summit with my classmates. At first I didn't understand why my father's words hurt people. But when you spoke, I cried. I didn't cry because I felt guilty. I cried because I realized something. I've lived in tall buildings all my life. I've seen the world from the top. But I've never thought about those who've always been at the bottom trying to climb. You made me see them. I don't know what I'll become, but I hope I become the kind of leader who lifts, not takes. Thank you. Baron." Traoré folded the letter gently and placed it in his pocket. He didn't smile. He simply whispered to himself, "The world is not changed by presidents. It is changed by sons who choose a different path." He looked out his window and saw candles glowing in the streets below. 1,000,000 flames, and all of them were rising. Traoré stood once again at the same global podium, weeks later. The world was listening now, not out of duty, but out of respect. "They said Africa was broken, but we were never broken," he began. "We were robbed, we were silenced, but we were never defeated." He paused. "Let the world remember, we don't ask for pity. We ask for peace. We ask for space to breathe. And we ask, once and for all, stay out of Africa, unless you come with clean hands." The hall erupted in applause. Some leaders stood. Even former critics wiped their eyes. But back in Burkina Faso, in a quiet village, Aisha, the little girl whose story touched the world, sat under a tree, watching with her mother. "Mama," she whispered, "I want to speak like him one day." Her mother smiled, tearful. "You already do." The screen faded to black, but across the world, something had been lit. Not a fire of rage, but a fire of hope. If this story moved you, hit that like button to support voices like Ibrahim Traoré's. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what part made you cry? What part made you proud? And please, subscribe, because more stories like this deserve to be told. Together we are not just viewers. We are the voice of the next Africa. Africa is not for sale. Let's make sure the world never forgets that.